Okay, welcome back to Thrive in the Future. This week, I have a man who needs no introduction, Cyprian. So, Cyprian, I know you from Counter Markets and Bitcoin Mystery School, and then you're also on Royal Path with Andrew and Father Turbo, which I really like a lot. So, what's going on with Bitcoin Mystery School right now? Are you still doing the novice classes? At one point, you were talking about backing some of that off, right?
Yeah, I think if I'm called to continue that, I will. I have so much on my plate, and there was definitely a season for that, but
Mhm.
that it takes up. I mean, I'm basically, I'm wiped. If I do that on a weekend, I'm wiped for like a week and a half after that.
Sure.
I'm kind of a I don't know if I would use the term antisocial really, but I'm a private person. I usually spend most of my like if I see anybody outside of my family during the week, that's like rare, except if I'm like going to the store or have to do something like that. I mean, and I'm a programmer, right? So that's nature. So it really takes a lot out of me, you know, that those 3 days, sometimes answering questions, they can go like some of those classes have gone like 3.5 hours in a session, 4 hours, I think, one time. So it's like, it could be 10 hours over a Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and for me, for somebody who's like, I really have to in order to, especially in groups. I'm good one on one, but especially in groups, it's a lot for me. So um, it was quite demanding. Maybe we will revisit it. I think right now things are really in flux in terms of financial stuff,
Hmm.
and I'm saying globally.
Sure.
And so, crafting a message that's really, really useful. Right now, it doesn't really feel like things are solid enough to really be, giving people the same sort of, um, let's say help or perspective that was a little easier in 2021. Let's say, and the people who sort of were able to see things then, they really understand what's happening now. So
Right.
now we've reached a new phase. I don't know. I don't know if it will pick back up, but certainly the group, the Bitcoin Mystery School group of former students, is incredibly active, and so it's been very useful. I'm thankful for all of the people that I think we probably closed in on about 1,000 people, total that have gone, maybe 700. You know what I mean? That have gone through
Hmm.
the whole thing. So I'm really thankful for everybody that participated over the years. Maybe it'll come back. Maybe something different. We'll see. Maybe something altogether different comes out.
Okay. Yeah, I it's been a blessing to me, and I know the Telegram group alone has been worth the price of admission.
Yeah, I think that's probably the most valuable thing that has come out of it. I didn't know that the community was going to, and I mean, I'm saying to me, right? Like completely selfish. Um, I find great value. In terms of, you know, a source of daily knowledge and also just interaction with people who get it. For me, it's that, and I mean, counter markets is less active. That Bitcoin Mystery School group is really, really active.
Sure.
Um, and I think part of that is also because people sat in with classes together. That's something that yes, it's great if that, the newsletter group is fantastic, but there is a different situation if, like, no, I've actually I've been a fellow classmate. I've seen this person's face. I've heard their voice. I kind of know where they're coming from. We've gone through similar experiences together. So yeah, it's been a great value to me, and I think it's been a great value to a lot of people who've been involved.
Great. Yeah, so you were talking about a new phase. So one of the reasons I wanted to have you on is talk a little bit about mindset. We're kind of
Mhm.
in a sort of 2020 type phase. And what I saw back in 2020 was a lot of my prepper friends, including myself, plenty prepped, not a big deal, didn't lose a job, had enough stuff, and that yet weren't prepared mentally and even
Mhm.
spiritually for what was happening. And then just a lot of them just fell into depression.
Mhm.
And because of that whole, I mean, prosperity is a religion in this country, right?
Mhm. For
and all of a
sure.
sudden,
For
wait
sure.
a minute, what's going on here? I'm not guaranteed this, right?
Mhm.
And we're winning. We're back to the we're winning part, and
Mhm.
it's like, okay, I wouldn't say anything that's happened in the last 2 weeks is winning, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
So yeah, I wanted to get your take on that, and some of the tips.
Yeah. So this is actually an interesting topic because it allows us to, and I want to be careful with it
Hmm.
as well, right? Because um whenever we are, this is something that I'm trying to do a little more. I mean, I'm not by nature very good at this. I'm generally pretty blunt in terms of the things that I say.
Sure.
And but when I say those things, I say them be, because I'm very, very confident about what's going to happen. So I more try to restrict myself to the things that I'm extremely confident about,
Hmm.
and not comment on things that I'm not so confident about, if that makes sense.
Yeah, sure.
It tends to give a much better track record, you know what I mean, in terms of predictions, if you just stick to the things that you yourself are pretty much 100% sure that this is the case. um and I think that that in many ways gets to the crux of where, let's say, depression could come in the life of, talking about the context of the last 3 years,
Hmm.
in the life of someone who had styled themselves a prepper.
Right.
Because the very, we could say, the presupposition or the foundation, the pattern, the core pattern that's happening if someone is self-styling themselves a prepper, is really, it's about a bet.
Hmm.
It's a bet on a prediction, right? Because there's many different ways to prep.
Sure.
That's what's interesting, right? Is that we have a prepper community, and I know what that means. And I think a lot of people, especially people who are, on our side of the fence, whether or not they are preppers, but even people who might be considered enemies, they hear the term prepper, and I think it's there enough to where they're like, I can make some pretty reliable guesses about this person's, let's say, political bent,
Right.
some of the things that they believe that may or may not be called conspiracy theories, probably some of their daily activities, their to a degree, their spiritual orientation. I can say a certain set of things. Okay, and so that's interesting. So that also tells me, now we actually get into, it's actually a question of eschatology, which is interesting,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah, let's go there.
Eschatology, yes, eschatology being the study of the thing at the end, which
Hmm.
is the eschaton, right? So
Right.
knowledge or wisdom about the thing that comes at the end, the eschaton. And so every religion obviously has some eschatology, right? They have a cosmology and they have an eschatology. So it's like, how did things come into being? How did we get here? And then where do things end? This is generally, any spiritual tradition is going to have both of those, a beginning and an end. And the
Hmm.
arrow of time goes from one to the other. Certain ones, the eschatology, they'll have a cyclical. So they'll be like, well, there's no real end. Every end is a beginning, but they can also sort of say what that transition looks like. Right. So even if you're talking about somebody that believes in reincarnation, or if we're talking about the wheel of time, we're still going to have these sort of phases and cycles. Okay.
Hmm.
So if we are a prepper, then we necessarily have an eschatology that we subscribe to, right? Because what are we prepping for? Well, we're prepping for the eschaton. We're prepping for the end.
Hmm.
And now, the end of what? Right? That's always the key. The end of what? So the end of civilization as we know it. Okay? And now we can view that in the largest sense, like grand globally, or we could view it in a much more localized sense, that just sort of my country,
Right.
right? Or my, the order. So maybe the country sticks around, but the order changes. So what do I mean by that? It could be something like, you know, the Nazis come to power in Germany. Well, Germany didn't go away.
Right.
But certainly the old order left, or the Bolsheviks come to power in Russia. Well, the country of Russia remained, but the order ended. And so within the sort of prepper community, these are the things that are talked about and that are prepped for, right? So it's at the large. So sort of like no more internet, no more electricity, financial system globally shuts down. What does that look like? And then there's like tyrants take control. They're going to take everybody's guns. They're going to start throwing people into concentration camps. Maybe the other stuff doesn't crumble, right? But let's be prepared. But we need to prepare for that. So it's prepare at the local level, prepare at the global level, and people kind of pick and choose between that.
Sure.
Okay. So what happens when an apocalypse that signals an eschaton actually occurs and it's nothing like what you prepped for?
Yeah.
And you've been prepping for 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
And you've been engaging with people for 20 years in consensus about the eschaton. You've been building a mythology. And then this thing happens that you actually spent zero time prepping for because you couldn't have prepped for this particular situation.
Right.
Right. You only actually have at that point, you only actually have two options. And I think that we've seen both. Right. Either one, well, the Depression is actually a doubling down.
Mm-hmm.
And the Depression, you know, is going to go along with like not getting to acceptance.
Sure.
It might be part of the grieving process for your worldview, for this world, because honestly, what has actually ended? What has actually happened? Well, you've actually experienced an eschaton. Your order, the framework, your mental framework has ended.
Right. Well,
right?
like Father Turbo says has said on several episodes that depression is actually more about pride.
Yes.
And it is, why is this happening to me? This shouldn't happen to me. And that's really the core of what that whole experience since 2020 has been like.
Mm-hmm.
And we're starting to see it again, right? This shouldn't happen to me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that shouldn't happen to me is where we can drill down,
mm-hmm.
right? Because then you say like, well, why do you say that? Why shouldn't it happen to you?
Right.
No? And the answer is because it doesn't fit into my worldview. That's really what it is, right? This shouldn't be. You know, it's interesting because I'm a software developer, right? And so in software development, developers talking to one another, a software will have a certain behavior. And one of the things that, you know, the developer who wrote the software will say is, well, that shouldn't be happening. So what am I saying? Right. And I say it myself, oh, that shouldn't be happening. Well, what I'm actually saying is my understanding of what the code consists of what it does, of the reality of the code, right? That I wrote ostensibly, or that I maintain, right? Because this bug is being reported to me.
Right.
It doesn't match up with what's happening. Right. So you'll hear things like, well, that should be impossible. That shouldn't be happening. Oh, there's no way that it doesn't make any sense that would happen. Right. And if now I can change the code so I can go in and investigate. Good. Okay. I don't have to get depressed. But let's come to a situation where, okay, I can't change the code.
Mm-hmm.
Here's the code. And this can mean a lot of things, right? Because it isn't just I wasn't prepped for it, but it might also mean, well, now I'm in a community that was wrong, right? I'm in a community that everybody in this community, our reality just ended.
Mm-hmm.
So what does that mean for, and I find great value in my community, and who doesn't, right? Like it's the most important thing.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, I find great value in this, and this is what and my own reputation with others, right? what I've built myself up to be, how I understand myself, because we understand ourselves through the stories that we tell ourselves about where am I in the story. Well, it's all over.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And especially, I mean, it's such a setup to be like, your identity is I am prepared. If
Right.
that's your identity and then you're not prepared, and it's clear that you're not prepared, that's hard, right? So
Right.
if you eventually, you're going to either have to come to acceptance or it's going to ruin you. Right. So
Yeah, and
you're
that's
going to
what
go through the
you
stages of grief.
right, and that's what you said back in 2020. You need to get to acceptance as quick as possible, right?
The first thing that I said,
Mm-hmm.
the very first thing that I said, right? In March 2020, my message was the world as you know it has ended, whether you realize it or not. And that was a message to everyone, including myself. Because the world that I had known as well had ended. I wasn't prepared for what we were hit with. How could anybody have been prepared for what we were hit with?
Sure.
Right? The nature of it was so you couldn't write it. Because sure, there were people who were prepared for like a real crazy outbreak style pandemic. How many people were prepared for, no, there's not actually anything and it's a magic spell? How many people were prepared for that at scale, at global scale? Nobody. Nobody was prepared for that, including me.
Right.
And so that's the other thing, is to be like, oh, okay, my reality is shattered. Let me accept that and let me figure out what the new reality is. And a lot of people, I would say, you know, maybe it's not the majority, but I think it's powerful that so many people, some people it took them, a few, it was instant, right? A few, it took them a year.
Mm-hmm.
A few, it was 2. Many more are coming around to it now because they see that, as you say, the same game is being played, starting up again.
Mm-hmm.
It's got a new cast. It's got a little bit of a different details to the story, but you see, it's the same narrative again. The manufactured global crisis, right? And the people who came to acceptance and realized, oh, this is a magic spell. You're seeing a lot of people have the ones who are honest. They're having a real, what you would call a come to Jesus moment, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're realizing that, oh, no. This is a spiritual warfare. There's an unseen world. If I'm really going to prep, I need to prep much more than just material.
Right. Yeah, you said you tweeted last week about the definition of crisis, and that was really eye-opening. Give a little bit more detail on that.
Well, the word crisis in Greece, in Greek, it means decision.
Yeah. So it's a decision point.
It's a decision point. And actually, when it was first used, it was used in medicine. And it's the point at which it's the pivot point, you know, when they're like, if he makes it through tonight, you know, then he can recover. But tonight's the critical night. Like if he makes it, if he can just make it through the night, then he can probably live. It's like that.
Wow.
So it's that pivot point between life and death,
right,
where a decision has to happen. A decision has to be made, and if the wrong decision is made, it's death. That's what crisis means.
Mm-hmm. So we're all trying to avoid crisis and avoid struggle, and you know the folks that are running the country or whatever are actually trying to drive through that decision point. And if you were a leader under certain circumstances, say you were in a company, you would be driving to a decision point also, right?
Of course. I mean, well, there's the famous quote from Rahm Emanuel, right? Who was the chief of staff of Obama and then went on to become the mayor of Chicago, where he says, never let a good crisis go to waste,
right,
or never let a crisis go to waste, I think he says.
right.
Because he says you can do things in a crisis that you wouldn't otherwise be able to do. Well, that's it.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And he was Obama's chief of staff, but you got to realize you don't become chief of staff for people to understand what a chief of staff is. for a president, right? This is the brain.
Sure.
This is the brain. This is the person who's going to herd the cats, who's going to organize all of these powerful political individuals who are all vying for the top spot. All of your secretaries, the leaders of the, in the legislature who are in your party, all the people who would love to take you out and put themselves in there. And this is going to be the person who's going to get them all to work together for your benefit. That's what a chief of staff does. Okay. So, and that's to me, that's the highest level of Machiavellianism that anybody could have. And here he's telling you straight up, never let a crisis go to waste. You could do things during a crisis that you wouldn't otherwise do. Well, to me, the corollary of that is manufacture a crisis whenever you need to get something done.
True. Yeah. Never let a decision point go to waste. Drive it toward a decision point.
Always. Always. And so this is what we're looking at now, that every time these crises come about and people say, we're hearing it now with this banking crisis. And they say, oh, it's a failure of the regulators. It's a failure of the regulators. And it's like, who are the regulators? Right. And then you look and you're like, well, the top regulator in all of this would be the Treasury Department. And it's like, well, who's the head of the Treasury Department? Oh, Janet Yellen. Well, what was her former job? Well, head of the Federal Reserve. You think that they messed this up?
Yeah.
This was a failure? No, this isn't a failure. This is exactly what is supposed to be, because what does it end up with? Cui bono. Well, it ends up with the big banks getting bigger.
Right.
Everybody taking all their money out of the small banks that they had it in and shoving it all into the big banks. Right. Well, there's a revolving door between the big banks and the Fed and the Treasury. Right. You remember the 2008 crisis?
Sure.
Financial crisis. Right. Who was the Treasury Secretary? Hank Paulson. What was his former position? Well, he's the head of Goldman Sachs.
Yeah. Didn't he become the Treasury as well?
He was the Treasury Secretary at the time. When the 2008 thing happened, Hank Paulson was the Treasury Secretary.
Right.
And he was the former head of Goldman Sachs. And who ended up winning in that? Goldman Sachs. And who ended up losing? Well, all the competitors of Goldman Sachs, Bear Stearns, Lehman Brothers.
Right.
And it's like, oh, this was a failure of the regulators. It's so weird when a failure benefits your friends. That's not called a failure. That's called success.
That's called success.
When your actions benefit your friends, which by extension benefits you,
right,
then that's success.
Sure.
That's the definition of success. I would hope for everybody, right? I would certainly not think that someone would think that success is when your actions are to the detriment of your friends and your family and your pocketbook, right?
Yeah.
So, and this is the same, thing that we're going through with the postmortem of the last 3 years. From Twitter files, right, and the weaponization of the 3-letter agencies. And it's like, the weaponization of the FBI. You mean the armed group that enforces the will of the executive branch with guns?
Yeah.
No, it's already weaponized.
Yeah.
It's a weapon. What do you mean the weaponization of the FBI? You mean like the weaponization of a gun? The weaponization of a sword? It's redundant. The FBI is a weapon. It is a weapon, right? And so this is, I think that, and so if it's used as a weapon, it's used successfully. That's not a failure. None of the things that have happened have been failures. The same sort of situation as it's coming out that it's like, oh, I'm seeing in the parliament, they've got all these things where it's like, oh, all the things that we knew, the woke poke, you you would have to vaccinate. These numbers came out. There was some MP, they all walked out on him, and he was like, you would have to vaccinate the best way. It was something like you'd have to vaccinate 900,000 people to prevent one hospitalization.
Sure.
And then he was like, because of that, you would have like some crazy number of 8,000 severe reactions. Right. This is coming from like House of Parliament, where he's reading the government's own numbers. And then
the
like,
folks walked out, right?
They walked out before that. Yeah, they walked out when he was about to speak. And then he said, we don't even know how many people under the age of 39 you would have to vaccinate, because there's never been we don't even have a number on someone under the age of 39 who had a serious issue from the virus.
Sure.
So we don't even know how many. You'd have to vaccinate infinity people, everybody, and you'd have however many million serious adverse reactions where you put somebody else in the hospital. And he's like, and it would cost this many millions of dollars. And that's the key. It would cost this many, not even millions, billions of dollars. And it's like, oh. And he's like, this was a failure. This was a failure. And it's like, a failure? A failure? Who paid for the campaigns? What industry is paying for the campaigns of the people who just walked out on you? What industry is running more ads on the news? Because it's like, it was a failure of the fourth estate, the media. Well, who pays their bills? Turn on cable news and start jotting down what industry. As the ads come in, start jotting down what industry, right? On cable news. What is this industry? Oh, it's going to be 85% pharmaceutical. Right? So your actions benefit your friends, which ends up benefiting you, the people who pay your bills. That's not failure. That's success. And so this, I think, when we get into this idea of like, okay, what should we really prep for? How do we really prep? Well, first you got to see, well, what is the battle that's really taking place? What is the threat? Right? I think it's first to understand that there is a battle going on. I think some people are aware of what that battle is, but they think it's the battle between left and right, or liberal and conservative.
Yeah, definitely.
Right? And it's like, okay, well, let me prep for that. And people did prep for that. They're going to take our guns. They're going to take our guns. And it's like, bro, they injected poison into babies.
And you did nothing.
Not a shot was fired. They don't need to take your guns. They can inject poison into babies next door to you. And you won't fire a shot. Why would I take your guns?
Right. Yeah, they shut your churches down on Easter and not a peep.
Not a shot fired. Well, I don't need to take their guns. But keep your guns. Keep your guns, especially. But what I might do is I might make you think I'm going to take your guns.
Right.
So that you'll start thinking about that. Look over here instead of looking at what's actually going on. I'm happy to do that. Now that's easy. Oh, that's all I have to do to get away with literal murder. All I have to do is start a rumor that I might take your gun.
Yeah.
Put in a bill into your local, have some random state representative put in some bill that I'm going to require extra registration or not allow you to have a bump stock. And I know you're out of the fight. Whether that thing ever goes through, whether it gets through committee, you're gone for 3 months.
Right.
That's all you can't see any other things that I'm doing.
Well, and most of the people that I know, every evangelical Christian I know got vaxxed, and most of the big talking preppers, self-sufficiency guys that I know, held out, talked real big until I got to make my truck payment.
Yep.
And then they all got vaxxed.
Yep.
And then some of them became evangelists for it then. Oh, you need to do this. You need to take this other one because it's not as bad.
Well, always, by the way.
Yeah.
that always happens. There's actually this relatively famous story in the Russian Orthodox Church. So for people who don't know, when the Bolsheviks took over in 1917,
Right.
they basically for they instead of demolishing the church, basically what they did was they installed a new church.
Mm-hmm.
It's Patriarch Sergius. They call it Sergianism, and this they called the Living Church. And so it was basically a state approved church. They got to approve all the sermons. They changed things around. They did demolish a lot of the buildings. They killed hundreds of thousands of clergy and lay people during the Soviet time. But there's this relatively famous story. I don't believe that the person telling the story he might be a saint. He might have been a martyr. But basically, he tells the story that he had a brother priest who, when the sort of the terror first came, and they were persecuting the church, they were having a conversation about, they were both very much against sort of the Sergian church, this living church, this Bolshevik church.
Mm-hmm. Which they always
And
call the living church,
the living church, right? As though the other one is dead, right?
Yeah.
So this is the living. Well, it's dead. They thought it was dead because they killed everybody, right? So
Mm-hmm.
that's kind of what it is. Like, if you want to live, join this church. And at that time, the actual Orthodox, there's what was called the catacomb church. So they were, practicing in secret. And this priest basically said, well, one of them, not the one telling the story, but the other one was like, well, I don't know. I'm looking at the situation of this, this Soviet church over time, and he's like, maybe it's not so bad. I mean, I see that there's some issues, but like, they've got all the things, apostolic succession. It's actually a way for people to actually go and get communion, and maybe from the inside, maybe a little bit I could change it. Like, maybe I could be a. And so he signed up. He joined
Mm-hmm.
up. And this priest who's telling the story said that just he began to notice a shift until the point where this priest was actually then calling him, the priest telling the story who had remained faithful, a heretic, and became a threat that always going to turn him in. He may have actually turned him in. Forgive me for getting this story, but the idea here is that this is the pattern. This is the exact pattern. And it's like a complete 180, a complete flip. And the reason why is it's cognitive dissonance.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Because again, it's about us not dealing with the apocalypse, the revelation, the end, the end of our identity. We need our identity. Our identity wants to survive. This is ego, right? So and this is why having a spiritual practice where you can practice and be okay with humility of having your ego crushed and being able to admit, oh, I did something wrong, and that doesn't make me a bad person per se. It makes me a human.
Sure.
Right? Even the fact that I went back on my own, I went back on my own principles, my own morals.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you can always turn that around. Right? That can always be turned around, and you can always bear witness to that fact. But if you refuse to bear witness to that fact, you will absolutely become a tool of that thing that you believed was evil.
Wow.
Every time.
Mm-hmm.
Because you have to. That's the thing. You have to. Because you're in denial. Mm-hmm. And you're cognitively, both your psychology and your soul, your spirit, it can't be holding those two opposing views. It's too painful.
Sure.
So you've got to say, well, no, I'm right now. Now I'm right. I was previously wrong. What I had believed then, that was previously wrong, but now I'm right. And then you go whole hog.
Yeah.
Right. And this is actually this is the end of 1984. Spoiler alert. I mean, it's old if you haven't read it at this point. Right. But the end of 1984, the last words is he loved Big Brother. Right? Because Winston, this guy who had been fighting it through the whole thing, at the end, no, he loves Big Brother.
Right.
He's deprogrammed and reprogrammed. And this is it, because once you accept that 2 + 2 = 5, and it's all linguistic, right? It's all linguistic games. That's what 1984 is. It's all about control through language.
Sure.
Which is a spell. Which is what they did. What did they do? They went and changed definitions of words. Well, that's straight out of 1984.
Yeah.
That's newspeak.
And
why? And Orwell says in there, he writes why. Well, the whole idea is that the goal is to get you to where you can't even think the wrong thing. You can't have wrong think because you don't have the language to even think, because we think in language, right? Where you can break those thoughts, because it's like, well, I don't even have a word for this concept, so I guess it doesn't exist.
Right.
It must not exist if I can't put a word to it, and I can't even think past this point because I don't have a word for it. Well, there you go.
Excellent.
Right?
Yeah.
And so, well, we see it. I've seen it in it's kind of like and I don't want to call out this particular individual, but there's somebody who's got a relatively popular YouTube channel, but there's a lot of these people, right? Where they've been going after the wokes and kind of the gender bender thing. And it's like, the longer you stare into the abyss, the abyss stares back at you, right? And it's like, you dance with the devil, you don't change the devil changes you.
Right.
And this is what, their degeneracy is your trap. But this person, it's interesting where, they've got their YouTube channel and they'll be commenting on these TikToks. That's sort of their thing. They comment on TikToks, and then they'll be talking about a particular, person who's one of the thought leaders of this sort of gender stuff. And they'll say he, and then they'll be like, oh, excuse me. At this point, ironic. Oh, excuse me, they, them don't want to get canceled by YouTube. And it's like, well, you can rationalize what you just did, but you just self-censored. You just gave a pinch of incense.
Yeah.
Now you could say, oh, it's just a pinch, and it's done as it's a troll. But it's like, no. You've altered your reality. Because what's actually happened is, why did it even trigger in you? Who's the censor in your head now? Because if I'm just having a conversation, that doesn't occur to me. I just say he.
Yeah.
But it's like, oh, no. You self-censored. You caught yourself, right? And soon you'll no longer miss the he. Soon you'll just go they, them, and then maybe in the beginning you say something where you rationalize it. Oh, because that I'm just saying they, them because.
Yeah. Disclaimer time.
Like, disclaimer right after. So it's like, you see the progression.
Yeah.
And it's like, oh, but there's nobody over you doing that. And it's exactly putting on the mask. It's exactly putting on the mask. That's true. Because what is it? What is a mask? It's a muzzle. It's self-censoring. It's the same pattern. And it's to be like, well, yeah, I know that like this doesn't actually do anything. I know that, but they said for me to put it on. So, or there's a sign that says I need to put it on. A person didn't even say it. And who knows, that sign might have just been left up. They may not be enforcing it inside.
Right.
Which was definitely the case here in Saipan amongst us. We just, at a certain point, we just were like, no. There's some places where the sign is still up and nobody's wearing it.
Nobody pays attention.
Well, because they just never took the sign down.
Right.
It was that unimportant to them.
Yeah, we still have
to not take it down.
We still have the social distance stickers on the floor.
They're still around.
Go this way, straight down this aisle. You're only one way down the aisle and everything, and nobody bothered to take those up, or they tried to peel them off and they couldn't, and stuff like that.
And so then what does it say if you still are following those?
Right.
Well, it's the same thing.
Well, see, and this is interesting.
You've internalized it.
Yeah, this is interesting. So everybody says, "Oh, we're winning," and everybody, it's common sense now about the vax. They haven't been keeping their eyes on what their politicians are doing, and at the county and the city level, a lot of them are still passing laws that, like, for
Oh
example,
yeah.
downtown Kansas City, Jackson County, um, county commissioners have still been pushing all the way through last year to with that New York law, right? To
Mm-hmm.
empower the health director so that they can unilaterally shut down everyone, or not everyone, but a specific thing, specifically a church, but
Mm-hmm.
not all churches. And then they
Mm-hmm.
can't, there's no recourse and there's no turning it back on. They can decide when they're going to turn it back on. Now, they're specifically behind the scenes calling out a specific Orthodox church that you and I know, right?
Of course.
Hey,
Of
wait,
course.
they're in there, they're standing too close together, they're kissing icons, and they're taking a common communion, right? And then
Mm-hmm.
there's no recourse, there's no, and then they turn it back on when they say it's allowed.
Mm-hmm.
And those folks are still doing that. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, New York has a law on the books, and a lot of these counties around here are doing the same thing.
And of course, it's
But
not
hey, we're
about.
winning.
Well, it's yes. I mean, that's the interesting aspect of this is how do you ascertain winning,
Right. I mean, winning
right?
as in air quotes, right? You
And
know,
I don't even mean you. I'm saying broadly,
sure.
right? How do
Right.
we gauge, winning or losing? Well, in order to do that, first we have to understand what game is being played, don't we?
Right. Right.
Right? And we have to understand, well, what are the rules of the game?
Mm-hmm.
And is there a broader, is there something broader that is taking place here? What is the scope? Because, you know, let's put it like this, like baseball, it's 9 innings,
Right.
right? But if you believe that the game is only 1 inning, right, then you might think that just because the other team didn't score and you scored 1 point, then you're like, we're winning. It's like, dude, you're down by 20 runs.
Yeah. Yeah.
They just put in their scrubs, right, to get some people some playing time, right, to prevent some injury, to rest their pitcher. They're blowing you out. You're only just paying it, and never mind. I don't even think we're there. People are like, they think it's just the at bat.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like, look, oh, strikeout. We struck that guy out, and it's like, dude, same thing. You're down by you. They already, yeah, okay. This is a pinch hitter, or this is the pitcher, right? But they just hit a grand slam on you like 3 at bats ago.
Yeah.
Oh, but you struck this guy out. Okay, but the bases are loaded and they've got their slugger coming up,
Mm-hmm.
right? So this is, I think that's the most important thing, and that's where the spiritual aspect comes in,
Sure.
because the scope, if we talk about spiritual, it's not that we're saying outside of the material,
Mm-hmm.
but we're saying expand the scope, because it isn't even just about those 9 innings, is it? Right? It's not even about those 9 innings, because you could be like, yes, we won the game. And you're like, yeah, dude, but you're like last in your division.
Right.
You're not going to the playoffs, bro. That team, that other team that you're playing was first. They're resting all of their stars. They put in their second string. You beat their second string.
Hmm.
And it's like, no, it's broader. And it's not even about one season, is it? Right? It's about a dynasty.
Right.
And then it's that's the thing. It's like it's bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. And you have to look at what you're doing. How are you planning? How are you seeing? What is your perspective? And then you can start to say, are we winning?
Mm-hmm.
Right? And what is it? What would winning look like? What would winning look like? Because right now, I think we're far from winning.
Right.
I mean, we're more I've never seen in my life the United States as as on the verge of civil war as it is right now. And there's no winning a civil war.
Yeah,
There's no winner in a civil war.
sure.
All that, hopefully the Civil War ends with the people relatively still intact, but that's not assured, right? And there's definite suffering that comes after that, and the sort of the reverberation of that can last generations. I mean, there are places that have not gotten. I mean, there are places that are in a low-grade civil war that have been in a low-grade civil war for centuries. Northern Ireland,
Right.
The Turkey, the border of Kurdistan and Turkey.
Right.
How long is that going to go on? Forever, right? Look at South Africa.
Sure.
Right? It's like, is that what we want? Is that winning? Like, that's not winning.
Right.
And so, I think that this is the key, and this is why so many people are adopting a more spiritual bent coming into the new time that we're coming into, because they recognize they want to understand better what is the battle that's really being fought.
So you've been talking about build the ark and the Ephesians 6:12. If you, it explains everything. So elaborate a little bit more on that. Some folks watched your build the ark and didn't quite get it. Right.
That's
it's
for
eyes
sure.
To see.
And ears to hear, for sure.
Right.
The ears to hear is the most important part of build the ark. Right. But let's talk about Ephesians 6:12, right? For we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against spiritual wickedness in high places, against the rulers of darkness of this world, right? So this is St. Paul really, I mean, this is just, people take this as like some sort of metaphor.
Right.
It's not a metaphor. In no way is this a metaphor. Like, this is literal. And it's to say that, no, every time that you think that it's this, it's this person that you're battling against, it's not. There is a higher level battle taking place. And I think maybe that sports analogy for people can be helpful, right? To understand, okay, you walk into a situation and you sit down in front of a game that you don't understand, that you've never seen before, a sport you've never seen before, right? And you understand that, like, the battles, the winning, the scope of that extends a long way, right? So we just talked about if it was baseball. So you could walk up and be like, okay, what's happening right now? Like, so what's supposed to be occurring? And then it's like, well, he's going to throw the ball, right? And then you got 3 strikes and you're out, and then balls and you walk. And then if he hits the ball with the thing, then somebody picks it up. And if they throw it to the first base before he gets there, or they catch it in the air, then he's out. Oh. And then the thing happens. You're like, oh, that was cool. And then the next guy walks up and you're like, wait a minute. Wait, what's going on? And they're like, oh, no. See, there's 3 outs. So you got to do that 3 times. And then if somebody gets on base, they can run around and they can score a run. Oh, okay, that's good. So then everything goes on. The 3 outs occur. Nobody scored. And you're like, oh, okay, so those guys won. No. No. So you see, there's innings.
Sure.
Actually, there's another at-bat. Now the other team gets to go. Oh. So then the other team goes. Right? And then they're like, okay, well, they scored 1 run and they scored 0 runs. So the one that scored 1 run wins. No, that's not the scope of the game. There's 9 innings. And then the 9 innings are over. Oh, so they won. No, there's a season. And then somebody gets all the points of the season. Oh, they won. No, there's playoffs. Oh, the season was just to see what the rankings would be for the playoffs? Yeah, it's only the playoffs that matter of who's the World Series champion.
Right.
Those were just to rank to see who's going to get into the play. Oh. And then the season's over. Oh, so they won. No. It's a company. You see, it's a company. The team is a company. These are all different companies, and they're all competing with each other to see who gets the highest market share.
Oh,
See, because they're publicly traded companies as well.
right.
Oh, and there's a game inside of that, of the shareholders who own that, who are trying to buy low and sell high on the
Right.
stocks. Right? Oh, and they're competing with other sports. Oh, and then they're competing, there's cities competing to get this team to come there because there's a game there.
Sure.
And it's just like higher and higher and higher and higher. And it's like, this is what St. Paul is saying.
Mm-hmm.
That he's like, no. You're wrestling against flesh and blood. You're still on the balls and strikes.
Yeah.
No. The game is up here. And there's the only way to even begin to look at the game up here. You can't do that in one lifetime. The wisdom that is required for that is generations. It's thousands of years of recording and figuring out and describing the game. And that's tradition. That's holy tradition.
Mm-hmm.
And so a materialist could, and that's the thing, people will be with me like, oh, you're literal about like demons and all this. And it's like, well, when you're talking at the highest level, right? Think about it. We do that. Same person who's a materialist who will say, oh, demons, there's no demons. There's no disembodied consciousness. They're the same ones who will be like, well, big tech is doing this. And big pharma is doing this. And I'll be like, touch big tech.
Mm-hmm.
Touch it. Put your hand on it. You're saying it has desires. You're saying it's taking actions. You're saying it has a value hierarchy. That sounds like an entity to me.
Mm-hmm.
Corporation, a body, a person, a legal person. Our law says that there are legal persons running around that are disincarnate. It's in our law,
right,
that this is the case, that have desires and wants and bank accounts that you can sue without suing a human being and that are liable for their actions, but no human being is liable for the actions. But I'm absurd for talking about demons. But you want to tell me all about what the corporations are doing. Okay. Okay. That's a little off. You're not really examining your own set of beliefs because you believe that there are disincarnate entities that have a massive effect on your world and that are in control of people, that people are acting as their agents. The ancients knew this already. That's what principalities means. A corporation is a principality. This is what it means. That's what they're talking about. And so then that gets us to build the ark. Right? So once you understand that, like, so our world, it's not just us.
Right. Yeah, I think that
it's not just us.
I think that icon of John Climacus with the ladder really
with the demons pulling the monks off.
Yeah, pulling them off.
Because you have to ask yourself, okay, because somebody's going to say, well, but we make corporations, right? Well, we make them. We go down and file them, and it's just us. It's just the person who filed it. Really? Really? Is the founder of IBM still alive? Is anybody that worked for IBM in the first year that IBM was created as a corporation still working for IBM? No. Did IBM go away? No. Will IBM still be there? Very likely, when everybody working for it now is dead? Yes. And will it still be doing the thing that IBM is supposed to do, even though that will change? So IBM has changed and grown and learned. So why on earth would you believe that it only started when the papers were filed?
Right.
The paper filing was that's like saying that a human being doesn't exist until the birth certificate is recorded. And anyone who's an entrepreneur I've had companies that have been, before we needed to file paperwork to formalize it as a corporation, where we've been doing business for years.
Mm-hmm.
Right? No. It exists as an entity that's doing things and that I'm acting on behalf of, that I'm trying to gauge its will. What's good for the company? What's good for the company? Well, where's the company? You mean what's good for the company could be things that aren't good for the individual people who are within the company, or could actually be to the detriment of people within the company? Yes.
Yeah.
Well, wait a minute. And my fiduciary responsibility as a CEO is to act in the best interest of the company, not the people, but the company.
Right.
That's the corporate culture. Well, where's the company? It isn't the piece of paper. I'm not acting on behalf of the piece of paper that's been filed. That doesn't make any sense. Right? So if it's outside of the piece of paper, so then it didn't exist on the piece of paper. It didn't begin its existence on the piece of paper. Well, when did it begin its existence? And
Mm-hmm.
why do I believe that it came out of my mind and not that it's communicating with me to exert its will?
Hmm.
Those are the principalities and powers. We are their agents. We are their hands. Right? And they have their own set of beliefs, they have their own values, they have their own goals, their own telos of where they want to go and what they want to be.
Mm-hmm.
So that gets us to the ark. Right? Because and I said ears to hear is the most important part of the ark. Right? So I said build the ark. Okay. And people were like, I know what that means. I gotta make more chickens. I gotta go, I gotta go prep. Build the ark to prep. And it's like, okay, well, stop. What is the ark? What ark am I talking about? I think people recognize, like, the preppers certainly got Noah's ark.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Okay, but that's not the only ark. Right? Noah's ark is a prefiguring of all the way through of the and then we get the Ark of the Covenant.
Mm-hmm.
Right? Which the Israelites carried around, right? And it was to contain, and then they put it in the Holy of Holies because the Holy Spirit is inside, right? And you can't touch it, you'll die, right? So there's an immense power. It's containing life, and it's also the center thing. It's the thing that all of their culture is oriented toward, right? It's the central thing, and it's protection, protects, and nurtures,
Sure.
right? This thing for them. But that's a prefiguring of the Mother of God. She is the ark, right? Now she's an organic ark.
Mm-hmm.
She's a human ark, right? And she's going to carry, nurture, and protect in her womb, in her matrix. That's matrix means womb, right?
Mm.
So in her matrix, she's going to nurture God, the Holy Spirit incarnate. Okay, incarnate of the Holy Spirit and the Virgin Mary and became man. This is what we believe. Okay, so she's the ark. So then we say, build the ark. Okay, build the ark. Well, all three arks were built. That's what's important to understand. Right? So we understand that Noah built the ark. And then we understand that the Israelites, under the guidance of Moses and Aaron, built the Ark of the Covenant. And then you're like, well, Mary was, but the Virgin Mary was built, and it's like, yes, that's what we understand it, that the entire project of Israel was to, so that what, and this is what the fathers say, the entire project of Israel was so that a teenage girl could say yes. So what we understand in the tradition is that at a young age, the Mary's parents, Joachim and Anna, dedicated her to the temple.
Right.
So from the age of like 9, she lived in the temple. Okay, so she was built, right? She was built in the same way that, you go to a Marine boot camp's graduation ceremony and they'll talk about, what do we do here? We make Marines, they say.
Mm-hmm.
We build Marines, we make Marines. So the Mother of God was built, she was made, right? And she had a choice to say no, right? But she decided that she would become the ark. Now, so what's in all of those? So what's the first thing that you have to do before you build the ark? What's the prerequisite? There's a prerequisite with all of them.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, it's ears to hear, right? Because, well, first off, how do I even know to build the ark? Then how do I know what the ark should look like? How do I know what I should build it from? Well, in every case, told by God.
Yeah.
Right? God told Noah exactly how to build the ark and exactly what to do with it. Same thing with Moses, the Ark of the Covenant. Same thing with Mary. Right? Who it's announced to her. An angel comes down and it's announced to her.
Mm-hmm.
And what's the prerequisite of all of them? The prerequisite of all of them is first, you got to have ears to hear.
Mm-hmm.
First, you got to have ears to hear. So how do I prep? How do I even know that I need to prep? Right? Because these are weird things. You're going to go build a giant boat and you're going to put all the animals in it. What?
And it hadn't rained.
I never, you can't, and it hadn't rained yet.
Yeah.
Right? It had not rained yet. You're going to build it. It's going to rain. You're going to build a giant boat. You're going to put you and your family in it and you're going to be safe. Right? You can't intellectually come to that. There's no YouTube video that's going to say that.
Sure.
Right? Ears to hear. Same thing with Moses. Oh, you're going to build this. You're going to build a box. You're going to build this box. You're going to gild it in this way. You're going to put this angels on top. You're going to have 2 staffs between it, and you're going to carry it in front of you when you go. What is this? That's not a weapon, God. No, it's a weapon. No, it's the weapon. Right? And then here comes an angel. You're going to have a child. I don't have a husband. No, you're going to be a virgin and you're going to have a child. Never seen this before. This has never happened before. And the opportunity to say no.
Right.
Right. And of course, all the things that come with that. Because look, there's going to be plenty of people that aren't going to believe this. There's going to be plenty of people that are going to call you some things. Right? So this is it. So that's what build the ark means. It's like, okay, build the ark. Yes, I'm going to build the ark. I need ears to hear. I need ears to hear. Mm-hmm. And then what it is that you need to build is going to be revealed to you. That's what it is, because you clearly you're intellectualizing your way to what you were preparing for. Didn't work.
Right.
Didn't work. New strategy needed.
Mm-hmm.
New strategy needed. So whatever you think, something is coming, right? Mm-hmm. But whatever you think that something is at this point, that's not what it is. Like the details of that is not what it is. And so what's your best course of action? Well, your best course of action is to understand the sides that are fighting the battle. And then don't just stand in the middle of the battlefield, which is what most people did, mm-hmm. and get demolished. Because one of these sides is very happy to blow up the building that you're in. And the other side is not. The other side is actually fighting on your behalf.
Right.
Right. And so it's to figure out the side that loves you and is fighting on your behalf, and recognize that, like, hey, if you enlist, you'll be given orders. Mm-hmm. Because they've got the view.
Right.
You don't have this. You don't have the surveillance photos. You don't have the AWACS planes. You don't have the satellite. Right. They've got all the intelligence, and the intelligence will be given to you. But you're going to have to enlist, and you're going to have to fall in the chain of command. And it's not a human chain of command. Right? Mm-hmm. There are humans involved. Right? There are humans involved, but they are all pointed at the same thing, and orders can come directly from the top to individuals. Right. And they do. Mm-hmm. Right? So that's what build the ark means. It's not a, yeah, it is material. Of course it is, right? Because the spiritual doesn't ignore the material. The spiritual comes through and is manifest in the material, as we've seen, for better or worse. Right? But it's like, first you need to understand, like, well, what is it that you're supposed to build? Because your arc is not going to be the same as the next person's arc. Right? What you're given to do, well, it's war. It's war, right? Like we have infantry, we have artillery, we have communications, right? We've got the Navy, we've got the Army, we've got the Air Force. Your training and what you need to do to play your role is not going to be the same as what somebody else needs to do to play their role. So long as you're both following orders, you're both remaining faithful to the cause and to the sovereign, then what comes down and what you do will be complementary, even if you don't understand it to be complementary. Right? The guy that's driving the guy that's repairing a helicopter may not understand how that is going to help the infantryman. You know what I mean? That's going to need the support from that helicopter at some point in the future.
Definitely.
Right?
Yeah.
They're thousands of miles away, but they're complementary to one another.
Mm-hmm. Sounds good. Very good. So tell where folks can connect with you. Tell a little bit about the Royal Path.
Yes. So Royal Path is a podcast that we've been doing for, I think, a little over a year now.
Yeah, it's a little over a year.
Yeah, it doesn't seem like that long. And it's just on YouTube. You can search the Royal Path. I think there's enough views at this point that you could find it. Probably if you put in the Royal Path Father Turbo, it'll probably show up pretty good.
That Royal Path goes right to the top.
Oh, okay, great,
Yeah.
Great. Yeah, you put in the Royal Path on YouTube, and you can find it there. It's also on Spotify. And I think for people who are looking for, I think it's a pretty good introduction, even for non-Orthodox people. To, especially if you go back through the episodes, the early episodes, we sort of go through the creed. So it's a real, it's actually a really nice kind of, almost like
it's a catechism.
Maybe not even a mini catechism, like maybe like a full blast one. But I wouldn't sacrifice, an in-person catechism with a priest for that. But it certainly had a lot of the things that my catechism, because Father Turbo is the one who catechized me.
Me too.
And so, it's got a lot of the things that he teaches, right? So definitely worth it, and certainly worth it for people who are Orthodox. But even if you're just inquiring, or even if you just want to know more, I think one of the interesting things about Father Turbo and where he and I really connected is on the mystical. I think this is hard for a lot of people. I've spent a lot of my life, and even professionally so, for those who know my background, like deeply exploring the psychological on the Jungian side, really, right? Sure. What motivates people and whatnot. So the psychological and the mystical, because it starts to bleed in when you're like, okay, well, here's some mysteries here, but that they're powerful and palpable, and the occult and things like that. And Father Turbo also has a similar background in understanding those things, which, by the way, so do a lot of Orthodox saints.
Sure.
There are spiritual principles that are there that are just, I often talk about fasting, right? It's like, yeah, well, fasting is in every spiritual tradition, including the evil ones.
Yeah, except for evangelicalism.
Except for which tells you something, right? Well, it's like, man, the Orthodox say fasting is powerful. The Satanists say fasting is powerful. Crowley was like, yep, fast before you're going to do magic and summon demons, right?
Right. Candles
Candles and incense, chanting, right? It's like all of these tools. They're tools.
Yeah.
Right. And I think to start to have somebody who can help to bridge, and Father Turbo is very good at doing that, to sort of start to bridge people who are not used to that mystical aspect, that can make certainly orthodoxy seem very foreign, and difficult to comprehend, to start to have a glimpse into, okay, what's going on, where does this cross over? I think that's very useful. So I've really enjoyed it. I constantly, my mind is constantly blown just sitting there having the conversation. So yeah, people could definitely check that out. So Royal Path, easy to find on YouTube or Spotify. And then, probably best way to follow me is on Twitter. So at Cyprianus, Cyprianous.
Right. Sounds good. Thank you, Cyprian.
Absolutely, man. Thank you for having me.